Alberta Primetime with Michael Higgins.
Welcome to Alberta Primetime. Ahead tonight, our politics panel on reaction to the tragedy unfolding in Tumbler Ridge, a northeastern BC community not far from the Alberta border. But first, the flow of conversation around separation.
I just caution people who might be tempted to devolve this into a rote political wedge to have a moment of sobriety and say, no, this is a moment to bring people together in a constructive way.
Calgary MP, they're addressing the complicated crossroads of having vocal constituents on both sides of the separation spectrum, an issue now being fed by debate over a petition pushing for a referendum on independence. Joining us this evening, Tim Caulfield, Canada Research Chair in Health Law and Policy at the University of Alberta. Of course, a noted author and expert on misinformation. Professor Caulfield, good to see you, sir. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me on.
Okay, we've spoken before about the role of misinformation where health is concerned, most recently around elements of vaccination. To what degree are you now watching information flow where this issue of separation is concerned?
Yeah, I'm watching it closely, and we're seeing some very familiar trends where you have, a very loud, and I think it's really important to highlight, minority shaping, public discourse and also creating concern and polarization around this issue. I think it's a really good example of the power of echo chambers, and I think out of the gate, I think it's important to highlight increasingly all of us, can reside in an information echo chamber. But here you're seeing, a relatively small, and if you believe the recent polls, only about 8% of Albertans feel strongly about separating or approve of separating, really shaping public discourse around this very divisive topic. And I think it's really interesting from that poll I just referenced. It's an Angus Reid poll that came out very recently. It found that those that are favoring separation, they get their information from alternate sources, alternative sources of news, and from friends and neighbors. That's their primary source. For those that favor staying in Canada, they're getting their information primarily from traditional media, etc. And I think that really highlights the role of echo chambers and really the you're living within a community in shaping the discourse around this topic.
On that alternative media front, influencers, even from south of the border, how much sway can they potentially inject into the conversation? Yeah,
this is a really good question. Now, I'm very concerned about foreign interference in this debate. There's some inkling that that's already happening. We've seen that some influencers who are presenting themselves as residing in Alberta, in fact, maybe residing elsewhere. Look, polarization and rage, it's become an economy, right? It's become a side hustle for some individuals. Research tells us that rage and grievance and fear drives our social media algorithms. So if you can weigh into a topic that is polarizing, that is built on grievance, you're more likely to get clicks. And I worry that we're going to see that happen in the separation debate. It already is, but I'm also worried that foreign actors are going to take advantage of that to try to influence the outcome. And of course, we're already seeing what's happening with the Trump administration and the rhetoric around Alberta. So I think my fears, my concerns are justified.
I mean, you referenced the Angus Reid polling from earlier this week. If over time there is a shift in those numbers toward that support for separation growing, what would you be looking for then as maybe a potential driver?
Well, I think it's interesting to note that the numbers really haven't increased substantially. If you look at the clustering of research that's gone on around this from 2020 to now, there hasn't really been a dramatic increase in individuals who are interested in leaving. Perhaps those are kind of leaning towards, we're seeing a little bit of a rise, but it's still, what I would call a minority, a loud minority, but a minority nevertheless. And what's really interesting is those residing within that minority, they seem to believe that they are actually the majority. This is called the false consensus phenomenon. And it's because they are living within these communities, right? They're living in this echo chamber, and it feels like, their grievances are the grievances of all of Alberta. What I think we need to be watching for, and this is something we can learn from Brexit, is those that, want to separate, they may be more engaged in this topic. They may feel stronger about this topic than those who want to stay in Alberta. So that vocal minority can have an impact on overall public discourse. And as we learned in Brexit, you can end up with, surprises at the polls. I don't think we're there yet. I think the numbers are very strongly showing that Albertans, by a large majority, want to stay in Canada. And also, I think it's important to highlight a large majority of Albertans also seem to be upset how Albertan politicians are handling this issue. In fact, that same study found that most Albertans think that Carney is handling this better than our premier. And I'll tell you, those within the separatist movement would be shocked by that result.
Okay, well, maybe to finish the conversation, off the top, we heard comments from Calgary MP Michelle Rempel-Garner. What responsibility do you feel then rests on the shoulders of our elected representatives as this debate around separation continues to build?
I would love to see more of an informed debate. We also know that, and I'm going to be careful here because this influences discourse across the political spectrum, but we know that conspiracy theories, we know that misinformation is feeding into the separatist movement around things like immigration, for example, and the Great Replacement theory, which is just a horrendous, racist idea. It is having influence. I would like to see more informed discourse around all of the topics, and let's bring the temperature down on this.
All right, we'll leave it there. As always, appreciate your time, Professor Caulfield. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Timothy Caulfield, Canada Research Chair in Health Law and Policy at the University of Alberta, noted author as well, an expert on misinformation.